The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Kia ora and welcome to the first episode of The Fold. I'm your host, Duncan Grieve, and this is my first podcast that's mine alone. This is me having a second go at recording an intro. The first I did ahead of my first interview, which is coming up shortly. But it had a different name then, a name which I found a bit too... It could be read as pompous, and so I'm changing it to be called The Fold because I like the fact that it's kind of a pun. Do you get it? It's about the media and how we could be all about to fold. The fold is like a term that means you can be either above it or below it. And above it is, on a newspaper means that you've got that really prime position. On a website, it means it's the first thing you see when you click a link or go to a site. So it has a specific meaning, but there's definitely, I'm leaning into the double meaning of a business just basically disappearing because, man, it's been that kind of a year. The first media story of the year I wrote was about Vice disappearing from the local market. One of the most recent was about 3 potentially being sold or disappearing entirely, and it's. I find this industry, which I've been a part of, we run a business within. I find it so fascinating, and I love it so much. And it's kind of infuriating. It does a lot of sort of not very smart things. It does a lot of really, really clever and well executed things. It provides a huge benefit to society and occasionally causes society real trouble. But fundamentally, I don't think people want to live without the media. But I do genuinely think we're going through this transition where all options are on the table. There's a full recovery to health potentially. I don't know exactly how, but look, let's dream on and pretend it can. But there's also a situation where we lose some real titans of our industry, and we don't know what that means for all of us. So I'm going to start a monthly podcast, kind of vaguely inspired by the monopod, which I did after the sale of 3 was first announced, this sort of slightly crazed half hour, just me alone and with my producer Alice Webb-Little, who's here with me right now. Just because I think that there is so much going on in this industry that you can report and analyze only so much within text, but a lot of it just needs to be chewed through. So once a month, I will be coming in here and grabbing someone else from the New Zealand media industry who I think has a really, interesting perspective on it. Sometimes it will be a journalist, sometimes it will be, a producer, a CEO. I'll just go wherever I think the most interesting story is, and then periodically when things blow up, and when I say periodically, it feels like it's about once every 2 weeks at the moment, I'll come in and, either just do a sermon myself alone or get someone from the spin-off to chew it through with me. So the first episode is me interviewing Sinead Boucher. Sinead is the CEO of Stuff. She was the first editor of the website Stuff back in, I think, 2005 or thereabouts. She's a reporter. She's a great journalist. I think she's had a really profound impact on Stuff. You might think that I've been a little soft on her, but, especially those of you who are inclined to associate Stuff with some of the excesses of the kind of what's what you might call the clickbait era. Maybe that's true, but I genuinely really admire the way that Stuff has turned around as an organization, and really it's emphasized some of its best reporting and its journalists, and it's put them to the front. It's got this climate change section, which I know from experience can't be justifying its position based on clicks, and they're putting it there because they believe in it. And these are signals that maybe, they're people who have formed a particular opinion of Stuff might not necessarily see, but as someone who's watching them closely, I think they're pretty impressive, and to do them at any time is impressive. To do them at a time when they've been for sale, for years, and particularly this year, and they've been, hustling to start new businesses. They're operating under as difficult a set of circumstances as anyone in the New Zealand media, and yet they're producing better work than maybe they ever have at any point in the company's history. And I'm sort of fascinated by the process of moving a ship of that size. Stuff employs more journalists than anyone else in New Zealand. It's a complex organism, and I think that it provides this extraordinary service to New Zealand, which is to make, it covers everywhere from Hamilton down to Christchurch, the biggest chunk of the country. I mean, it covers the whole country, but it particularly emphasises that big stripe through the middle, and does it very well, and then puts it all on the internet for free. It's, it may be that we look back in time and look back on this as this extraordinary period of plenty and of access to that resource, or as just a giant business folly. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble. I'm really excited about this. I'll now hand over to the interview, which I conducted with Sinead about a week ago. I don't think it's out of date as of now, but if another huge story breaks in the meantime, apologies for us missing on that. We start off by talking about her career and the sort of the early years of Stuff, and end up discussing some of the big issues. She's got really interesting things to say about comment moderation, about Facebook. They've taken a really strong and principled stand there, which I don't think many people know. So, stick around. I think there's a lot in this, and please subscribe. Keep listening, because we'll be doing more on this in the new year. So, yeah, thanks. Welcome to the fold. Kia ora, Sinead.
Kia ora, Duncan.
Sinead is the CEO of Stuff. Are you the biggest news organisation in New Zealand?
We describe ourselves as that, yeah.
It feels accurate. Certainly the most popular news site, just an absolute force of journalism in this country, and one that has, under her reign, kind of undergone quite a specific transformation. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all of the mad stories that have come out of this year, from the potential sale of 3 to the RNZ, TVNZ merger, to the relationship with the likes of Facebook, and hopefully it's going to be a good time. Thanks for listening, and let's just get into it. So, Sinead, I wondered if you could start by kind of telling me about your road to this job. You're the CEO of this company, but you've been with Stuff on and off for quite some time, and just tell me about how you got here.
Yeah, I have to say, it was never a path that I saw developing when I started off in my career as a young reporter with the press in Christchurch, which is where I grew up. And, I loved that. I loved that job. I spent 3 years in Rangiora, North Canterbury, doing all the councils and very odd police stories that tended to come out from an area like that. And then eventually sort of headed overseas to the UK for another OE I'd been before. And I just landed in London I think this is sort of a really defining time in my career and the way it developed, just at the time of that first .com bubble, about 1999, 2000. And it was a time when lots of new startups, everyone was sort of getting into some digital business. And as a result, there were a lot of opportunities for journalists coming in because media was expanding and journalists were being, lured away from media into new startups and things. So I ended up getting a job at the Financial Times, which had just launched into its first big, commitment to digital journalism. And I actually got that job because Jonathan McKenzie, who's currently the editor of the Waikato Times, we'd been journalism school mates and then flatmates in London. He had been offered a role there and then had decided to stick with the Daily Telegraph and said to me, why don't you just turn up in my place and see what happens? And so I did. And the guy who ran the breaking news sort of digital team said, oh, you Kiwis, all right, come on in. And that was my first foray into sort of digital journalism. And the FT was an incredible organisation. It still is. They had 400-odd journalists in their original newsroom. So they more or less decided to replicate every single position into digital. So, for example, they might have had a European aviation reporter for print, so they also had a European aviation reporter for digital. So it was jobs bonanza. And my job was in start off in breaking news and writing up breaking news. And at that time, breaking news constituted waiting for the hour to publish the story and things like that. But it was really great. And that led on to a role with Reuters. And then, my husband and I had our baby daughter in London, decided to head back to Christchurch. And Paul Thompson at the press sort of asked me to look after the press website, which was just sort of sitting there. And that was, great fun. That led on to become the first digital editor for Stuff.
So, I mean, that era of digital journalism now feels kind of quaint in a way, that there was so much excitement about the opportunity of it, and the business models weren't yet established. The CPMs were far higher and looked like you might be able to build a business around online, purely online advertising in a way. What are your sort of main, if you were able to sort of go back and sort of tell yourself what was coming, what are some of the assumptions that were made at that time that proved to be sort of catastrophically wrong ultimately from a business perspective? Or were you less involved in that business side?
I think one of the ones that obviously gets thrown up all the time is the big mistake that news media made for not charging for content from the start. And I don't know whether that really would have been the saviour of everything or not, because the internet has thrown up so many different kinds of businesses who would have not all played within the same rules as news media might have tried to do. So at that time when the internet was still being established as something people used every day and we relied on, for us it was all about building scale of audience and trying to convince people to come and read in digital. And a lot of it was about fighting internal battles about, this was something that was worth investing in and important. It would be important to journalism and to the businesses going on. But and that was it had a real Wild West sort of feeling about it at times. It was really good fun. And because we were sort of almost like an internal startup of a way and stuff, nobody really wanted to put their, a lot of the senior management didn't really want to get their fingers into the digital side because they weren't sure if it was going to be a thing or not a thing, and we were just left to get on with it and go for it. And I think, I think the things we did right were really focusing on transforming journalism from being a once-a-day print sort of thing into being a live medium where you could convey information as it happened and develop new forms of storytelling. And I think the things that would do differently, I think it's just really hard to say. I maybe it would have been completely different if we'd started doing digital as a subscription service from the start, or maybe it would have just opened the window to other kinds of digital news businesses to get established and build advertising-based models, as they have done anyway.
So with Stuff, I kind of... when it first emerged, there was this kind of horror at the name, at its lack of specificity. It was come up with by an ad agency, is that
Yeah,
right?
I think Saatchi's were involved in that. And I think one of the sort of anniversaries of stuff, it might have been the 10th anniversary or something, we went back and looked at the original list of names to see what we could have been called. And I'll tell you, Stuff was the best of the bunch. And I don't know if it was one of those ones where the agency wanted it to be called Stuff, so everything else was really bad on the list, like deepandwide.co.nz was on the short list. That's a whole different business model right there.
Oh, yeah, I think you might have some.
Pavlova.co.nz, 24/7, all these really, really cheesy names. Stuff was really the only answer. And I think, at the beginning we got a lot of flack around it. But as we've developed into the era of Googles and Twitters, etc., it's just become the right name.
Totally. What does the spin-off
Yeah.
mean? You can spend a lot of time and energy worrying about names, but really you just imbue them with your work. Through that, not necessarily in that early period, but through, I guess, towards the end of that first decade, and certainly maybe 2010 through 2015, Stuff acquired a reputation for a particular kind of sort of pace and it became a code word, even its comment section, Stuff Nation, fairly or not, it acquired a reputation for the kind of the worst excesses of the digital kind of clickbait era. What was your role within the company at the time, and did you sort of have concerns about that and how it was sort of impacting some other elements of your
I
craft?
probably had more concerns about the way Stuff was developing in terms of its reputation than actually about what Stuff was actually doing. I always thought that sort of, cry of clickbait and everything was unfair, even though it's true that the tone of Stuff back in those days is different than where it's settled now. And I think it was part of the evolution of Stuff trying to, like a lot of businesses, figure out what a digital news site was in the modern era. Stuff Nation, I'm still really proud of Stuff Nation. That was one of, that was our way of trying to open up the platform of Stuff to other New Zealanders, any New Zealanders, to tell their story and publish it. And some of those stories were incredibly powerful and still remain among our most read content. There's one in particular that sticks out of a mother who wrote a Stuff Nation story about watching her son drown and not realising that he was drowning. And because he was smiling and fine, and that just, it was incredibly powerful because it was told in her words and it had a real impact on our audience and became part of a water safety series that's been used again and again. And I think, one of the things I really can make me see a red mist now is when people talk about the clickbait on Stuff. And I always ask, what stories are you meaning when you talk about that? And very rarely can someone actually give me an example. Because the news, I watch the newsroom and I watch the journalists work every day and the producers and everything. And clickbait, or the whole idea of that, is not something they aspire to or work to at all in any way. It's quite the opposite. If anything, they're all hyper aware that they don't want to be, pulled into that side of things.
The comment section was another place that kind of, people would, and I find quite sort of jarring at times on particular issues, and that seems like something that there's been a concerted effort to kind of restrain or reform.
Yeah.
I know that Patrick wrote quite eloquently about it a couple of years ago. How do you sort of process that? On one level, you want to have interactions with your readers, but you want them to be within a particular bounds, and there's a particular load that is placed on publishers that isn't present for Facebook, and we'll talk about them later. But do you want to talk about the Stuff comment section, how it acquired that?
And
that
I can't
flavour?
exactly remember now when Stuff launched into comments, but it's certainly quite a few years ago now. I think the comments were always moderated, but often in our early technology, they were moderated in a way that was out of context with the story they related to. It was a really difficult process for the moderators. You can imagine that job, trying to go through what rapidly became thousands of comments and trying to put them in context with what, the subject might have been. It was just really old-fashioned technology. And even though there were always a set of guidelines, a set of standards and things, got through that in the context of reading a story or watching it, you would never have published, or just humans trying to get through a lot of work. And I think Patrick Crutzen, who's the editor of Stuff, a couple of years ago introduced a sort of, he revisited what the Stuff comments were and what we wanted them to be. And we were really definite that we still wanted comments on Stuff. That was an important part of the platform. But that we were going to have to find some way of making them more civil and therefore useful to people than they had been. And he introduced a lot of, I guess a higher standard of guidelines, different rules for how the newsroom worked, a different comment moderation system, which I think has been successful. And we're still, we get, well over 100,000 comments a month that we publish, and probably almost half again that we don't publish.
Wow. So the rejection rate is that high?
Yeah. And there are always people trying to get around the rules and, try and sneak in comments that are code for some sort of white supremacist meeting going to be held somewhere, or some other kind of, racist term that we're not familiar with, or is not that obvious that it doesn't get picked up. So the moderator is extremely vigilant.
Do you ever kind of consider, given the fact that this is a moving target, does the sort of cost benefit of both the engagement and the sort of extra revenue you might derive from it, do you ever get close to doing what the likes of us and RNZ and so on have done and turning them off?
No, we've never contemplated that. I think we've always felt they were really important to Stuff in an important forum, and kind of connected in with the idea. We view ourselves not just as a news site, but as a Kiwi platform where there's news, where people can share things, where there's other publishers and other content providers can place their own content, and where Kiwis themselves can have stories published. And we think comments are an important element of that. But they are, they're an ongoing battle to deal with successfully, and I've certainly done my time in moderating those comments, and I'm glad that's not part of my job now.
So you took the job. When did you first become CEO?
It was about 2.5 years ago now, yeah.
Describe the company as you found it, and what drew you to the role, and what you sort of felt like were the first orders of business in terms of changes that you wanted to make to leave your mark on the business.
So when I came into the role, it was the year where the Commerce Commission and the courts had finally put to bed the fact that the attempted merger between NZME and Stuff, after what was probably about 2 years of going through processes, going through appeals. I'd been part of the executive team under Simon Tong during that time, who was a fantastic CEO and boss, and had given me a lot of opportunities and development. And he sort of left towards the end of that Commerce Commission period. And then I think, what ended up as a result of that was a company that had, effectively been up for sale for a protracted period, where, staff were really unsure about where things were headed, where we're going into something one way, where we're going to be on our own, what would happen if the merger didn't happen. And it had become, difficult to sort of recruit people and to sort of convince customers that, we were a long-term sure bet to sort of do business with or come and work for. And so when I came into the job, I think the thing I really wanted to do was to try and give our staff, firstly, a really good place to work, even if we couldn't control a lot of the uncertainty out there around our industry in general, but around, the ownership of our company, and to try and focus on, the values that were at the heart of a news media business, which were ultimately about producing journalism that has a positive effect on the communities it serves. So we, tried to connect back strongly into the purpose and how every role in our company played a part in that. So if you are a salesperson, your work and your success at it is funding the journalism that goes on to keep our society healthy and to tell stories and to champion those who don't have much of a voice otherwise. And then, we focused on, all of these jobs. These type of leadership jobs have a finite period. They're not lifetime jobs. So I really thought about what was the legacy I would want to leave for the business, but also the things that the business could achieve within the, context of New Zealand communities. And we just put our heads down and tried to focus on that.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
I mean, as an outside observer and a consumer of stuff, as a product, I feel like, regardless of whether it was fairly earned, that reputation for a particular kind of style and set of values that existed before you took over, that over the last 2.5 years, it does feel different in terms of the journalists it champions, the style, the tone, the emphasis on, climate change stories. I mean, that's a section for you now. And for example, the thing there was almost like a symbolic power to me in a way when Al Nisbet, who had published a number of, I think problematic is too weak a word for it. They were racist cartoons to me. He left, and in the sort of aftermath of that, there was brilliant coverage of Te Tiriti, and it did feel like there was a new emphasis on having a bit more sort of purpose and values, and in what had felt maybe more laissez-faire, I guess, from it was sort of it expressed a sort of a view of New Zealand to its audience, whereas in the past it almost expressed the audience's view in a way, or it felt kind of driven more by what the audience wanted. Was that like, how do you go about making a transformation like that? And did you meet resistance from audience and or from journalists, or it's such a huge ship to be turning around, or
yeah, and I think from the inside, it didn't necessarily feel like we are changing from this thing to that thing. It felt like an evolution in the life cycle of where we were. There was that, if I look back at those, they're not really necessarily the early days of stuff, because stuff is 20 years old next year. But that kind of period where actually it went from being a once a day, upload for newspapers into something to be developed in its own product. And I'm really proud of a lot of the things that we did then, because we built something into a national brand that really created that digital breaking news, live news coverage in the New Zealand context, that dragged an old-fashioned organisation in and really reinvented how journalists worked around the country to produce news for their community. And I think a lot of the, the rough edges were part of stuff learning what that type of site should be, could be. It was reflected elsewhere in all sorts of different publications around the world too. There was a sense, which I think has passed in recent years, where news media companies weren't really sure what they should be in the digital era. In the years when the Facebooks and YouTubes and everything were growing up, and there was how much are you like them versus how much do you try and stand strongly on your own foundations that you've always been built on. And I think that evolution now has partly come from some of the internal transformation we've done to try and focus the editorial resources on coverage that is of national interest, not just a collection of regional and local newsrooms, which is still, they're the bedrock of the whole company. But, things like creating the national correspondence team to focus on specific issues like climate, like, Maori affairs, all sorts of things. Bringing in the Stuff Circuit investigative team and, a lot of the sort of growth around video and some of those things have just been about this continuous change of trying to put ourselves into a situation where we can produce the best work for the most people.
And while all that was happening, the backdrop was that you were for sale and they were trying to merge. I mean, how do you... That's such a weight to know that you have a sort of a I guess to a certain extent a reluctant owner, and you're talking about a lot of things which are about forward planning and giving people a sense of having career paths and so on, and yet it's really hard to convey that when you there are stories coming out of your own newsroom talking about the uncertainty of it. How challenging has it been to have that sort of always hanging over you?
I think it definitely is a challenging thing for an organisation to deal with, because it's too easy for people to even subconsciously slip into a feeling of limbo where you're not making a decision one way or another, or you're making a decision based on something you think might happen even if it never happens. But it's I think what we've really tried to say is that all we can control is the work we produce, and and doing that to the highest possible standard. And if we do that well, we will be having an impact, we will be relevant to people, and there will be a place for that. We can't control, and in some ways it doesn't always even matter who your ultimate corporate owner is. We've been owned by Nine, we've been owned by Fairfax Media, before that it was INL. And it does have an impact in one way, and the other way you just need to kind of put your heads down and do the work that our audiences and our advertisers want from us. And I think we've, one of the big challenges has been about recruitment, for example, because, attracting good people in when you can't necessarily say what might happen in a few months with ownership is difficult. And I think we've managed to get to a stage where we can attract really good people because they're attracted into the purpose of what the work is for. And we've tried to do, things internally in terms of work environment. We're a flexible working organisation. You don't have to be in the office. We stepped out and tried to extend parental leave out beyond the government minimums and things. All the things that would about trying to create a good workplace environment that would be attractive to people and coming in, but also a good place to work for people who are already there. Yeah.
I mean, the big thing, obviously, that impacted or created that sense of limbo was the Commerce Commission decision. One of a pair of decisions which had a huge impact on media. I was talking to someone yesterday who said that when they spoke to the Commerce Commission at the time, they went down the list, or they spoke to the 8 people who made the decision and said, obviously we're impacted by social media. You'll all be on Facebook, and of those 8, none were on Facebook. Firstly, were you in favour of the merger, and do you feel like they understood the gravity of what was happening to the media and the digital media, and how urgent this need for consolidation was, that it wasn't, a new monopoly being kind of created for venal commercial reasons. This felt existential, still does.
Yeah, I was in favour of the merger then, and I was really frustrated by some of those elements of the process when it became clear that the Commerce Commission was going to set aside the impact of Facebook and Google. Not that they didn't view them as our competitors in the market, and they took a more traditional view of the market. And that was really frustrating, because the biggest impact on our businesses have been that disruption to the business model caused by, consumers shifting to social platforms and these global platforms having extremely good data-driven advertising products that have, undercut the business model. So to me, you couldn't separate out the ability to fund journalists and keeping media going from the advertising that had always sustained that. I think the other thing that, when I think back on that process, when I was the executive editor for the group, that I found really frustrating was there didn't really seem to be a belief that the editorial teams could be independent from the commercial interests of the company, which is, where it came down to the plurality of voices and the journalists. You'll know this, Duncan. Journalists are independently minded people, and never, in my experience, ever as a journalist or having come through into the sort of more commercial side of the business, and certainly in our business, has there been an interference over what stories could or couldn't be told as a result of that. So I actually found that, I felt personally affronted to a level, as did the other editors, that there wasn't a belief in that kind of editorial independence, and that could still flourish and survive regardless of who owned the companies.
Was it sort of galling then when Jane Patterson's story broke 2 weeks ago today that, this is something we've all been kind of hearing murmurs of, and sometimes you don't know whether it's just us our conjecture gets repeated and comes back to us through a different path kind of thing. But there has been a sense that government, which came into power saying we're going to do something big with media, and then that fell apart under some fairly incompetent stewardship from the then minister. But that there's a proposal which hasn't yet been confirmed, I should say, but certainly feels like it's got energy and about a potential for a merger of RNZ and TVNZ. The fact that that's a tacit acknowledgement that, and not even particularly tacit, that the Commerce Commission were wrong, and that consolidation is necessary.
There was, there's definitely some irony in that. And, I've actually got no real problem with that government plan if that is what comes to fruition. Obviously still a lot of detail underneath there that we haven't heard around the commerciality of it and any of the sort of new plans there. But it makes perfect sense to try and consolidate in structural ways, in ways where you can share the cost of technology or backrooms or offices or all those things, which were a big part of the NZME stuff merger then, so that you can focus your resources on content and journalism and, without wasting on duplication of platforms and all sorts of things. So if that's, part of the rationale behind that, it is perfectly logical. And it's perfectly logical in the commercial media world as well. And we've seen it happen all over the world. There has to be some sort of rationalisation and consolidation where you can take down a lot of backroom costs and underlying structural costs so you can keep doing the work that you're there to do.
Where do you, if absent some form of intervention or consolidation, like if I realise it's probably impossible to talk about the report that came earlier this week from Tracy and Luke about stuff.
Great example of editorial independence.
Yeah,
right there.
I can't imagine that you or Michael Fox were particularly thrilled with that coming out. But absent that, how do you, it almost feels like there's going to be a consolidation by stealth of just a steady attrition. Like, how do you see the landscape in a few years' time if there isn't some ability to kind of get control of this? Because the trend lines aren't great. TVNZ, a lot of this data is kind of haphazard and hard to get hold of, but they seem to have gone backwards in terms of revenue by, over $100 million in the past 20 years. And that, you look at someone like MediaWorks, so at one stage had $700 million worth of debt. The idea that a media company in New Zealand could be allowed to have $700 million of debt,
it's incredible.
It tells a story about, whereas right now you can buy NZME for $80 million. It's just, and I don't think that that's particularly widely understood. How do you see this ending without some kind of structural or intervention kind of change?
I think there will be structural change, and I don't know exactly what that will be. Obviously, what's happening in the public media side is one thing. I think ultimately we're a country of 5 million people. We have ourselves in our own company 49 newspapers, as well as Stuff, as well as Neighbourly, and then NZME have their own set, and MediaWorks, etc. There's 5 million people here to sustain that, either through subscriptions or advertising. And with so much of that advertising revenue flowing into social platforms, it makes it, the economics are really difficult. I do wish I had a crystal ball to see how it would all play out. I mean, I know there are a lot of good things and green shoots happening, and I overall I feel optimistic and positive, but I still feel there's a difficult period to get through in the next few years, where there's sort of different business models being trialled, where some of the seeds that have been planted around new revenue streams might hopefully be proven, or perhaps not. But I was really sad to hear about TV3 going on the market, and I hope there is a buyer in there somewhere. But we haven't heard of anything there so far. And what really strikes me is that the media industry, whether it's MediaWorks, whether it's us, NZME, or whoever, have been really vocal about these challenges in the last few years. And it feels like any moves to help consolidation or any background are really late in the game. That said, there's still a lot of things I think the government could do to help commercial media. There's been the small pilots around the local democracy reporters, which would be great to see some of that increase. But there's, you look to places like Canada, for example, where they've been doing a lot of really good intervention to help support the commercial media sector, including tax breaks, tax breaks for people with news subscriptions, tax breaks for news companies who have a number of journalists in certain towns and things like that. So there's a lot of things on that side. One of the things that I think would be a real benefit to the news media here is if the government decide to spend its own advertising money primarily on local news organisations rather than foreign platforms. That's something we've been talking a lot about and hoping to make some headway with.
I mean, that's an interesting one. I understand that in the aftermath of Christchurch, you made a decision to cease all spending on Facebook. Do you want to talk about what drove that and what power that gives you in terms of a sort of a moral clarity when you're lobbying government to kind of reconsider how it interacts with those companies?
Yeah. There was a couple of things that we did straight after Christchurch, which we had been talking about kicking around, I guess, for months beforehand. One of them was advertising of guns in our papers, which had already been under discussion because it's something our readers actually didn't really like, and we'd already had discussions about stopping that, and we did do that after the Christchurch shootings. And the other was our own relationship with Facebook in particular. And it had initially been born out of some of the things that were coming through overseas in terms of Facebook's involvement in, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the ability for its data to be misused in ways that could undermine elections or, have really negative outcomes for democracies. And after the mosque shootings, when obviously a factor of that had been the live streaming of the video on Facebook and the sort of, really quite unapologetic approach of Facebook after that, we really decided to draw a line in the sand and say Facebook and its values and what it stands for are diametrically opposed to us. And why would we fund that with our own money? We can't do that and be able to stand on any kind of, ethical grounds of our own. And this wasn't the reason why we've done it, but it has given us some moral clarity when we've gone to talk to government or others about, the thinking about the decisions of where to spend advertising money and what that's supporting. And it can either support a further growth or proliferation and misuse of data. And, even we've seen recently Facebook's, declaration it doesn't really care if people lie in political ads next year. It's not going to do anything to stop that. Ultimately, all the money that people spend on there is funding and enabling that. And we hope to make more of a stand on spend that money back with us because we are doing the kind of work that's contributing to a healthy community, as well as having the scale and reach and all the things that Facebook can give you in this market to reach your customers.
Do you feel like the government hears you on that? Because it strikes me as there's a strange tension that is in some ways inherent to the relationship between politics and media, but also particularly with this government, that on the one hand, I think Labour certainly has had, whether you agree with the policy or not, it seems to outwardly desire a strong and plural media, and yet you also have a coalition partner, a deputy prime minister, who regularly aggressively attacks journalists. I mean, over the past couple of weeks, both RNZ and Now Stuff have broken extraordinary stories about New Zealand First at a time when they're making, the government are making decisions about the future of media. And that the good riddance comment that Peter's made when to Tova O'Brien when the news broke about 3 being for sale felt emblematic of the attitude toward media of that party, that they don't perceive it as a public good. They view any reporting on its actions as not well sourced or motivated, and that sometimes you despair of that tension, where you've got on the one hand an existential crisis, on the other a core part of government that is essentially opposed to you practicing your craft.
Yeah, there is definitely a tension in that, and I think for the most part, governments have been able to, no politician really loves the media when it's not, writing the nice things. But at the same time, I think there is generally an ability to divorce any personal political interest and look at actually the fourth estate. The health of the fourth estate is really important to this country. But, that is, as you just pointed out, not a universal view. And there is, there has been some discussion internally about some of that tension there. That our team did great work this week with the New Zealand Foundation, and the predictable response from the New Zealand First leader and Deputy Prime Minister was, fake news, fake stuff news. I'll deal with the fake news later. And we've all heard that cry before from someone else who has probably actively sought to undermine trust in the media, and we can see some parallels there.
How corrosive do you think that is when you have someone who's our Deputy Prime Minister, one of our, I'm sure he is our longest-serving parliamentarian, in some ways an iconic New Zealander, whether well-deserved or not, making those kind of statements about your own organisation and about what I think is, some of the best and most important work we've seen all year.
Yeah, I agree on that point. I think there is, it is corrosive to a level, but I think in that context, it plays to a particular group of people who follow that party anyway. I don't necessarily think it's something that's a widespread impact. But in general, the kind of move over the last couple of years that's come out of, Donald Trump and the States to invent this kind of term of fake news and direct it incessantly at legitimate news reporting has been really corrosive in terms of trust in media, especially when, by and large, the news media is not the ones who spread fake information, disinformation, fake news. It's the opposite. They're trying to battle against this tide. That's been kind of borne out more on the social platforms where anyone can say anything and direct it at anybody. So in general, I'm worried more about the overall erosion of trust in media, when actually at a time it's more important than ever that people realise they can trust their local news organisation to give them the facts and the truth and allow them to make up their own mind about what they think of that.
One of the many things that I bore people with in conversation is this carve-out that the social platforms have that exist for them and don't exist for media organisations around their lack of responsibility for what's published on them. The sort of so-called safe harbour provisions, which mean that they can effectively act as publishers but not have any responsibility for what's published there, which is why they could live stream a massacre and sort of essentially suffer no consequences. And it's kind of like the original sin and opportunity that created a lot of the internet, but particularly the social web. Do you ever kind of think about that or have a view about the level of, you talk about your comment moderators. That's very expensive and tricky, and so at some stage, if you're dealing with white supremacy and racism and so on, it's a traumatizing exercise. That the onerousness of, and just the general responsibility that you have as an employer and a publisher, the way that we feel it versus the way that it is just sort of, it's not even in their makeup, and they strongly resist any attempt to insert a kind of a level of responsibility or human interaction at particularly Facebook. Do you think that is that there is a case for reform or regulation?
Oh, absolutely. I think on many levels there is a case for reform and regulation, starting with tax at one level, but also I just do not think those platforms should be able to, just throw up their hands and cry, we're not a publisher, we regret this, but we're not doing anything about it, and get away with it when they have, the ability to reach and influence so many people. And in this day and age, a social media can be somebody's primary way of consuming news or what they think is news. And I absolutely think that they should be regulated in that way, in the same way as news media.
Do you think that there is any prospect of that happening?
I don't see it happening in the near future. I think these things move extremely slowly, and I also think, you can see in the European Union and some of the European countries there's been real moves to try and regulate the platforms in various ways, but in general, I think there's also a bit of a reluctance of governments to tackle these giants, possibly because they don't quite understand that world so well themselves, and there's a bit of once you plunge into the world of algorithms and data and global platforms, it requires quite a sophisticated knowledge of how they work and where the potential pitfalls and opportunities for exploitation are.
We're sort of running out of time here to an extent, but I guess I want to end on just looking at the media work situation. I think you're right that the media has been talking about this for some time, and there've been the closures of community newspapers, and I think there was a report recently that talked about the number of journalists in New Zealand halving from, actually in fact it's less than half the number it was sort of 20 years ago. But there's something almost symbolic about the power of Three, and with it News Hub, that newsroom, which is one of the three great privately owned newsrooms in the country, and one of, if not the best gallery team over the past 20 years, certainly in terms of its aggression and its style. What do you think that the public and the government knows the stakes now, and what do you think if Three were to go, what do you think we would lose?
I have so much admiration for that newsroom and the team there and the work that they've done over the years. I always have done, and they've really scrapped and delivered amazing stories over the years in straitened circumstances. They've never been an organisation that's been awash in cash, but they've been able to deliver incredible programs and news. And I think it will be, in some ways, the troubles of the media industry are occupying a lot more headlines. But in other ways, I think perhaps people won't really realise the seriousness of that until some of these organisations have gone. We've been looking a lot in our own organisation recently about what is the true impact of journalism, not just ours, but journalism in its role in society, and how can we convey that message that if it wasn't there, some really important things would drop away or be at risk. And even this week, our own stuffed circuit story about the Afghan children killed by the leftover ordnance in New Zealand, by New Zealand deployment over there, had a very rapid response from our Prime Minister and the Defence Force. And that wouldn't have happened if that work hadn't been done. Here, I think about it as sometimes even as being even more important on a really local level, when you've got journalists covering local authorities that wield enormous budgets and enormous influence over people's day-to-day lives. And when that kind of just being present and holding those authorities to account for their decisions and the knowledge that there's a journalist present and watching can have a real influence on the outcomes and decision-making. In the States, we've seen there's a lot of studies now on what has happened when news organisations have closed up shop in towns, and there's just been an almost immediate rise in corruption, a drop-off of civic engagement, nepotism in public institutions, all that sort of stuff. And we absolutely don't want that to happen here. So to prevent that happening, we've got to be able to deal with all these really thorny issues around how do you create the kind of environment where diverse news media can flourish and survive.
Are you confident?
I am. Sometimes I think we have these conversations and they kind of tend to sound quite doom-filled. But actually, I am confident in a lot of ways. And in one way, I think, another thing that kind of gets thrown out there a lot is that journalism these days is far more shallow and nowhere near as good as it used to be. Well, when I started my job as a reporter, 20-odd years ago, I can tell you that the work that's been produced by the young journalists now, including our own Henry Cook and, Matt Shand and all sorts of Florence Kerr, is far superior to the best of the work that was being produced then. I think journalism it's harder to fund. There are fewer journalists, but the quality of the journalism itself has just gone through the roof in a lot of ways. And yes, there are a lot fewer journalists and no doubt some of that is because of the drop-off in revenue for organisations, but also some of it's come about because of technological changes and because of changing consumer habits. Not everybody wants to read a newspaper all the time now. They've moved into different formats, and we have to adapt to that too. There's no point wringing our hands about that. How many of us, now get a daily newspaper? I probably consume more news than I ever did, and we have more consumers than we ever did. We're just still figuring out the best ways to sustain that. But I look overseas now, and you can see the paths being forged by some of the companies have gone down subscription models or doing different things that are really starting to get bedded in there. And that's what I mean. I feel like there's still a couple more years of challenge and hard graft and some difficult times, and but ultimately I'm optimistic about the outcome there.
Just one final question. The big thing that, and you sort of touched on it at the start, that idea that would things have been different had you gone towards a subscription or a reader revenue approach from the start? Like, is that something that remains a consideration for stuff? Because you have this enormous audience, you have these, as you say, extraordinary young and old journalists, but I mean the Stuff's young slate is just insane. It does feel like a public good that people would pay for. Does that, and yet it is. You have fibre and you have an electricity company, but you don't have the facility for people to pay for that journalism online. Is that likely to change?
It has always been something we've kept on the radar and have followed with interest what others have done. And I think it's definitely something we could consider and are considering, but I can't tell you what that might shake down into because we're not at that point yet. There's a lot of different models out there, from hard paywalls to donations to all sorts of things. And I think ultimately we do believe that the reader sees value in the work we produce and would be prepared to pay for that. What that looks like for us, I don't know yet. We embarked on our Ventures Stuff Fiver, the ISP, which, just a shout out to that team for winning the overall best broadband provider in the country.
Amazing.
The other week, they really cleaned up at the awards, including the People's Choice Award. And our little energy company, they were about, how do we effectively leverage off the scale of our audience by building businesses where people will pay us every week or every month. So a subscription business is just not subscription for content. But now we are definitely looking at what that future holds. But probably fair to say we're quite early on in that path. And good luck to those who have embarked on that already, because I think in general there's a feeling, well certainly my feeling, there's an underlying support among the different media organisations for each other's attempts at new business models, because ultimately we all want it to work out and that we can all find some stable way through.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, Sinead, for being my guest on this first episode of Deep Background, and hopefully we'll have you back.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to O Media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.